Imagine a man whose hunger was more than just physical, a man whose appetite turned him into a monster, crossing the line between gluttony, depravity, and murder. Today, we're diving into a very disturbing case of Joe Metheny, a Baltimore killer who embodied one of humanity's darkest sins, gluttony. This isn't just a story about murder. It's about how insatiable cravings, whether for food, drugs, or power, can drive someone to unthinkable acts. Joseph Roy Metheny, he was born in 1955 in Baltimore, Maryland, and his childhood, by many accounts, was troubled. His father died when he was young, and his mother described him as a very intelligent boy, but a loner. By adulthood, Metheny struggled with addiction of everything: heroin, cocaine, alcohol. He drifted between jobs, living on the fringe in makeshift camps near Baltimore's homeless population. But beneath that surface was the disturbing appetite that was growing inside him. The sin, gluttony, defined as eating or drinking to excess beyond reason. And this is truly a case, better than any, where the why is gluttony behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashley Willcott. As a TV anchor, a former judge, a former trial attorney, I would say that almost every case I've ever seen and dealt with has intersected with one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, wrath, lust, envy, gluttony, and sloth. The opposite of the 7 heavenly virtues, temptations that, when taken too far, turn deadly. In this case, killing in excess and eating and serving up the flesh is truly the definition of gluttony. A little later, I am joined by criminal defense attorney Natasha Scruggs in our breakdown segment, where we go deep on the how and the why of gluttony, turning not only into murder, but also cannibalism. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly 7. Joe the Cannibal, as he was known, Metheny, was a morbidly obese 450-pound man who worked as a timber worker and a truck driver in Baltimore, Maryland. He was a heavy drug and alcohol user, and he terrorized the entire Baltimore area in the early 1990s, and he confessed to murdering at least 10 people. His most grotesque and unsettling claim, though, was involving his gluttonous desire for human flesh. In an interview, he himself described a gruesome system he devised to both conceal his crimes and also satisfy his cannibalistic urges. Here's what he said. The murders: he would lure homeless people and sex workers to his trailer, where he would kill them, usually using an axe. Then he would process the bodies, and here's what he said about that. He would store the human flesh in a freezer, claiming that, well, nobody could tell the difference between human and pork meat once they were mixed together. And then a morbid business. Yep, you guessed it. He would use the human flesh and pork flesh to open a small open pit barbecue stand. He used the human flesh of the people he murdered to make burgers and then sell those to unsuspecting customers under the guise of a regular food stall. All these crimes were not actually discovered until Metheny was arrested for a different murder attempt in 1996. The only reason we know about the murders and serving the flesh of those he killed was through his confessions. Very hard to really believe, but they shocked investigators and the public, who then took steps to verify what had happened. Metheny claimed that after he ran out of drug money, he resorted to cannibalism out of a deep-seated craving for human flesh. While gluttony is often understood as just overeating, Metheny's case twisted that concept into really a horrifying and perverse motive for murder. Ultimately, Joe Metheny's claims were substantiated and found to have been true, And he was convicted of 3 of the murders. That's how many they were able to prove. And he was then sentenced to death as a result of those convictions. Actually, when he was in prison in 2017, he was found dead. He died while he was in prison. Metheny did admit to killing at least 2 women, although he claimed the number was higher. And these murders were 2 of the ones for which he was convicted. Kimberly Spicer in 1996 and Catherine Magaziner in 1994. His method of killing these 2 women in particular was extremely brutal. He would lure them with the promise of drugs and then strangle them. Those 2 bodies he did not cut up with an axe. He did not serve to customers, but rather he hid those 2 bodies in shallow graves near his trailer. So the actual killings themselves are not as much what made Joe Metheny infamous, but rather what he did with some of those bodies afterwards. He bragged about butchering the bodies, mixing that human flesh with pork sandwiches, and then sold them on a roadside barbecue stand. Here's what he told investigators. No one ever complained of the meat tasting funny. It was hard to prove for investigators that he actually served human meat to customers. But this was his story. He stuck to it. He was consistent. And whether or not true, this story burned his name into American true crime history and the sin of gluttony. Oh, I'm so delighted. Joining me now, Natasha Scruggs, criminal defense attorney. You and I have been analyzing cases before, and I'm so thrilled that you would be willing to join this podcast to talk about Joe Metheny. Because you know what I do is I look at the 7 deadly sins, and then I look at different cases that I've covered that I'm familiar with. I do research and deep dives to find new cases. And when I said gluttony, I think of gluttony as this excessive desire to kill people or serial killers, but to find one where it's not only a confessed serial killer, according to him, but also confessed that he had this deep-seated desire to eat the flesh. Cannibalism, what a jackpot, so to speak. Tell me your initial thoughts when you read about this case.
Yeah, I'm always curious about the cannibalism cases. I remember in college, I had to do a story on Jeffrey Dahmer. I had to do a report on Jeffrey Dahmer. And so it's always like a next step. And I'm always curious to see how the legal system handles it, because I feel like initially the legal system was not equipped to handle this type of thing, because you can't just charge someone with murder when they dismember and eat a person. And I still to this day don't think that we have enough understanding of how bad that is and how horrible of a crime it is. I don't think we have good remedies for it. We also don't have on the mental health side, we don't have any resources to treat it, like to treat what is going on in the mind of a person that wants to eat another person. So it's definitely one of those things that I think is great for the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah, and so, I always think of Silence of the Lambs. I had to think of the name of that movie dealing with cannibalism as well. And so you're right in breaking it down. Take it a step further. Can you imagine, Natasha, if you go out and eat and then later you read about this person who's convicted for 2 murders of two different women, and those women were found in shallow graves on his property. But then he starts confessing and saying that he put human meat with the pork in the barbecue that he was serving on a roadside stand. Can you imagine if you identified that roadside stand and said, oh my God, I ate food there? Talk about victims and the ring of victims that goes out. I can't even imagine if that happened and you believe that you ate human flesh.
That's what I mean. It's like unbelievable. It's kind of like the dark side of humanity, where you can't even conceive what you just did. Like the person would probably throw up immediately if they felt like that really happened. And because it's so unbelievable, I feel like it can go unchecked. Like that's how serial killers kind of get away with it, because they're doing things that are just so outside of the norm.
Yeah, that's a good point. What about when you just mentioned the remedies, and we don't really have the right remedies or sufficient remedies under the law? We know that he was sentenced to death. He was serving 2 life sentences when he was found dead in his cell. He was 450 pounds. And the only reason I mention that is that implies to me he probably wasn't very healthy, because you can have a lot of health conditions at that weight in his 50s. But when you say remedies, what does justice look like for all these victims? And again, the victims who ate the food, the victims go on and on in this particular case. So what are remedies that you think of, or how do you look at our legal system and say maybe it needs to be a little bit different for crimes such as these?
Yeah, that's what I primarily studied when I was in college. I was looking at different legal systems throughout the world. So I would look at different legal systems in different countries versus the United States. And we have so many different ways to punish people or to address issues. You got incarceration, you got, you know, going getting treatment, you have this and you have that, and you have like, rehabilitation and deterrence. It's like I think we need something outside of the general framework when addressing this.
Does
Because
it
this
work?
is
Does our general framework work? I mean, I think it begs
no,
that question. No, I would suggest the same. Tell me why you think not.
I don't think so, because the people that are going to do this, they are not. I think that the general framework works for a right-minded person who's
Hmm.
making a bad decision and maybe can be deterred from doing that or can be rehabilitated. For this type of person, I don't think that it works because their brain is not functioning right. So it's like, to put him in jail, even Jeffrey Dahmer, he got killed in jail. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So it's like, it's nowhere to put them. And I hate that. I hate that part of our society, because it's like the dark side of our society that's outside of jail goes to the dark side that's in jail, and we don't fix it. So it never gets fixed. It never gets prevented. It never gets solved. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation. I wish that we had more research done on it. I wish that we spent more time on it, as opposed to kind of just treating them like a display, like a history museum. Let's look at it. It's so many stories about Joe the Cannibal, so many stories about Jeffrey Dahmer, but it's not a lot of research done on how to prevent that from happening and on how to effectively address it in the justice system. I don't know. We do have victim funds, so I don't know if the victims had access to that, but I really don't know what justice is in this case.
And I do love that, I randomly pick which story for a guest to talk about. And it's funny how it works out, because here you're talking about something that you studied in college that's applicable to your knowledge and expertise without me knowing that. And that's amazing, because I always say on these podcasts, and I say it on TV as well, our criminal justice system is the best in the world. Do we get it wrong sometimes? Yes, but I believe it's the best in the world. But I digress and want to talk about that, because there are other countries, number one, in which cannibalism may not be against the law. Number two, there was a case of a teenager in another country moved there with his family for the father's work. And while he was there, he decided to graffiti on public property. And in that particular country, the penalty for graffiti was a public flogging. And the Americans in the embassy were outraged that this would be something that he would face. And the parents were seeking any and all help, because they didn't want their teenage son to be flogged in a public square. And the reality was, they said, well, this is our country. These are our laws. This is the penalty. He did it. We went through our system. And I'm not saying public floggings are the right thing, but I am saying, do some other countries have it right, where it's more immediate, where it is a punishment that would terrify maybe more people? And studying human rights and what's actually against the law. And again, I'm not saying cannibalism shouldn't be against the law, but I am saying there are some countries where it's not against the law. And so
True.
it would be treated differently.
It's true. I mean, like you said, it's some countries see it as a delicacy. Just like some countries eat certain foods that we don't eat. You know what I mean? It's flesh. But I think that the way we treat murder and the way we treat that stuff is obviously based on like the old common law. I
Hmm.
think we just need to revisit how we address this stuff. And I think education needs to be done for kids on up on what is right, what is wrong, things of that nature. Like even, and I haven't done history on Joe the Cannibal, but when I did my research on Jeffrey Dahmer, I saw multiple times where he could have been, like somebody could have intervened before it got to the point where he's killing. You know what I mean?
That's exactly what I was going to say. 9 times out of 10, I say, well, in retrospect, there were red flags. And it existed in this case as well. He was intelligent. Many, especially serial killers, are very intelligent. He was a
Hmm.
loner. And then he did face addiction issues, heroin, cocaine, alcohol. So there were opportunities. There were red flags. Now, does someone say these are some red flags? He's very intellectual, but he's socially awkward and he's a loner. Does that mean they're going to be murder? Of course not. But it does mean maybe they need help. Maybe they have mental health
Yes.
needs. Maybe they need someone to talk to. Maybe they need medication. And I do think our society is not well equipped to handle that and does not focus on mental health. Not only not focusing on mental health in terms of a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a social worker or a therapist, but also in terms of identifying other ways to cope with stress that are
Mm-hmm.
not medically related. So the Eastern philosophies and
Hmm.
meditation and other things people can turn to that I don't think our country utilizes enough to try to stop these people from going down a path that without help, they go down.
Yes, I totally agree. I feel like our country is very individualistic, where everybody's kind of on their own. And people feel like I don't need to get involved. I don't need to help this other person. Say if we at a school, it's 30 kids in one classroom. It's not my responsibility that this kid is a loner, or it's not my responsibility that this person is going through this, until it is your responsibility, until something happens where, because these people who we neglect, these people who we ignore, until it becomes in our face and we have to address it. I definitely think that mental health is one of our country's biggest downfalls, because we don't, like I said, we don't address it until it's in your face. We don't care about homelessness until it's somebody in the street in front of a business that we like. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I call it the domino effect. Like, I know all these dominoes fell before the last domino, which is the murder or the cannibalism. And
Uh-huh.
so I feel like if we could fix it before, we could prevent this stuff. But like I said, I think we have an assumption that everybody's okay, that everybody can handle themselves and everybody can handle this life. And so we don't offer resources to people. And the
Yeah,
best time to get them is when they're under 18, or I would say maybe under 25. If we can help people then, I don't think this stuff would happen.
and Natasha, I find it's one or the other. It's either what you've just identified, a lack of resources to help people when they need it, or in the alternative, there was a young man that when he was in middle school, there were a lot of red flags, and the teacher took the time and attempted to get services and work with the parents. And the parents
Hmm.
were like, there's nothing wrong with him. They were offended. How would you even suggest that he needs anything? Nothing's wrong with him. And so the other side of that is when you have caretakers, parents saying, oh, everything's fine, they're fine, they'd never do that. And it's almost like you can't win with one or the other. You face a possibility of these individuals going down the rabbit hole and doing terrible things. So here is something that someone who wrote about Cannibal Joe said. The crimes weren't about money. They weren't even primarily about sex or rage. They were about, because it was sex workers he did this to, they were about indulgence, about satisfying a grotesque appetite that he couldn't or wouldn't control. And to me, that goes directly to the mental health piece that you're mentioning, because it's not he can't get enough food, so he's finding something to survive on in order to have enough substance. It's nothing like that. This is the mental part that experts have to handle, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. Parents, family members fr- don't want to accept that something could be wrong or something needs to be addressed. At the same time, you can't correct parents. Anytime you try to correct a parent or tell them, hey, your kid needs this, or your kid might need some more attention, they get defensive because every parent says, I'm doing the best I can. Well, just because you're doing the best you can doesn't mean that this is the best that this person needs. And I mean, I know it probably happened. If we could talk to Joe the Cannibal's parents, I
Mm-hmm.
know that they've probably seen some things. And with our life, with our world where you have to go to work 8 hours a day, you have to do this, you have to do that. I'm not gonna lie, kids fall through the cracks. They're alone a lot, and things get missed. So when they go to school and the school tries to tell a parent what's going on, that parent should listen because that school is sitting up there looking at your child for 8 hours a day and they're trying to help you. But yeah, the mental piece of him wanting, and honestly, that's what a lot of rape, when I look into a lot of rape, a lot of murder, it's not about sex, or it's not about that itself. It's some mental, it's either about power, about just feeling alone. It's always something else. The rape or the crime is really just a symptom of a larger problem that's driving them to commit those crimes.
And in the news right now, and I believe it's Tennessee, but I'll look it up so I don't misstate, that's passing legislation that
Huh.
allows for castration of sex offenders in the right circumstances. And it can be physical castration or chemical castration. And it's ignited this nationwide debate right now about, does that help? Will that make a difference? Because it is about the rage. It's not just about the sex, but also the human rights. Is it something that a government should be allowed to do? And I'm going to look up and make sure that's Tennessee so I don't misstate. But it goes to that entire argument of the mental health piece. And regrettably, even the best parents, caretakers, and the best services available may not be sufficient to address some of the depravity like this. The gluttony, the depravity. Do you think he really ate? Because they couldn't prove that he ate the flesh, in part because then the body's gone. There's still bones somewhere, but they were never able to find evidence to prove he did this, although he gave some pretty haunting details. What do you think? Do you think it's possible that he might have done something as egregious as this?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely think that he ate flesh. I do. I think that that's why they couldn't recover some of the items, because he did eat them. Um, from what I've seen, this doesn't just come out of nowhere. This is not just someone just made this up. Even him, I don't think he could make something up like this. You know what I mean? But the desire for the human flesh, it sounds like an addiction. You know what I mean? He's already addicted to all these other things. If it seems like if he gets fixated on something,
Mm-hmm.
that he's going to pursue it. And that's why that stuff has to be checked.
Yeah, has to be checked. And then I think of Jeffrey Dahmer, and you can talk about this. How many people, and I'm not blaming anyone, but how many people do you think, Natasha, in your mind, should have realized something was amiss? There were reports of the smell coming from the apartment, noise coming from the apartment. But in addition to those, how many times do you think that someone should have maybe said, wait, I need to call the police because of ABC about this guy, Jeffrey Dahmer?
So many times. I mean, even his parents, to start with his parents, they knew that he was cutting up bodies of animals and putting them places. His first kill was in high school. Then he had all these other kills. The police were called on him multiple times where they would see a naked boy, because he had young boys, he had, college age boys that would come. They would see young boys with no clothes on and completely out of it, and they would just turn the other way. Because at that time, this is the 90s, they were afraid of homosexuality. They didn't want to address it. They didn't want to see it. And so they would see it and then they would leave. So I really think that as a system, Milwaukee, everything that happened there, they failed all of those people. And even if that last victim did not get away, he had some sort of
Mm-hmm.
intolerance to those drugs, he would have continued to do it. Like, nobody was going to stop him. The police came to his house multiple times. He got these neighbors, even his family members, like, they knew something was going on. You know what I mean? And he would go to the same clubs. There are multiple clubs. They would see him. So it's like he was doing it in plain sight. And I know a lot of the movies about him or the TV shows about him paint him as like this mastermind. He really wasn't a mastermind. He just looked like somebody who is not normally criminalized.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing things that the law enforcement was afraid of, being with men. It's the 90s. It's the height of like HIV and all of this stuff. And everybody is just turning a blind eye to it. Nobody listened to his neighbors who complained about him. So I don't see him as a mastermind. I just see him as being
Yep.
slipping through the cracks and our system failing the citizens of Wisconsin.
He just got away with it. He got away with it for a very long time. And I think about Cannibal Joe, and what I think about him is, even if you pull over to this roadside barbecue stand and it smells good and you're a trusting person, so you think, I'm going to get a pork sandwich. I would think, even if you do that, there's a potential you might glance and think to yourself, well, that meat that's on the grill sure doesn't really look like pork to me. I
Yeah.
guess it's okay. Or you take a bite of the sandwich and think, well, that doesn't taste quite right. Are they
Mm-hmm.
things that rise to the level of, I'm going to go call the police? No, but you think about even those little things where maybe you think, I better report this to, human services about the food that's being cooked out on the side of the road or whatever it is. I think even those little things can sometimes be the clue that can unravel some of the murderous actions of individuals. And in this case, I just think there were too many things. If he really did do this, and we know
Mm-hmm.
he was a convicted murderer, but if he
Mm-hmm.
really then killed some and fed flesh to other people and ate it himself, you would think there are things along the way to say, hey, yeah, by the way, he's a problem.
Yeah. The sad thing about Cannibal Joe is that he was harming people who, similar to what I was talking about with Jeffrey Dahmer, he's harming people that the world doesn't care about. The world doesn't care about homeless people, and the world doesn't care about sex workers. So these people can go missing and no one cares. No one's looking for them. No one's checking into them. Maybe they don't even have family and friends that are looking for them. So it's like he took advantage of the most vulnerable people in society. And because he has this little stand, he doesn't even have to have the regulations that everybody else has to have, where
Right.
the sanitary people come in and check and make
Health
sure it's all
inspectors.
good. Health
That's what it is. I
inspectors.
was talking about human services. I'm like, that's not what it's called. It's the health inspectors. That's it.
Yes,
Right. That could come in and maybe see as a legit business.
absolutely. And so it's I don't in his circumstance, I think the sad part is the people that he was harming were forgotten and forgot about, and no one looked for them. But the people that were coming up to his stand, they probably didn't know, because it's so many times that I go, because something that I notice about restaurants, sometimes they'll say that it's one meat, but it's not. It's something else, and I don't like that. And I'm like, this does not seem like this kind of meat. So they probably had the same reaction you had, which is like, hey, this doesn't taste right. Something
Mm-hmm.
tastes off, but I'm gonna keep doing it. You know what I mean? And it's just horrendous. It's very scary to think about everything that has to be done, all the steps that have to be taken to take human flesh and barbecue it and serve it to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he said, well, nobody ever complained of the meat tasting funny. And I have to correct, I did look it up. It is Louisiana that has that current legislation that does allow a judge, it's been passed, allows a judge to order specific certain sex offenders, repeat sex offenders, for instance, with other criteria, surgical castration. So I just had to come back and circle to that. All right,
Okay.
Natasha, I would love your last thoughts as we conclude. Again, gluttony just is the motive in this case, hands down. Sometimes I think, well, there's two or three motives. This one's gluttony because, again, not only does he claim that he killed all these women, but that he also did eat them and serve them up to other customers.
Yes, it's definitely gluttony, and the fact that he talked about taking their flesh and putting it into those grinders and making it hamburger meat. It's just it's the worst thing you can possibly do to a human body, a human being first of all, and then to a human body. So it's so sad, but I think it needs to be highlighted. I think more people need to talk about it like you are, so that the awareness is raised, and hopefully we can prevent something like this from happening again.
Great point. Because these things happen. Jeffrey Dahmer, Cannibal Joe, we could go on and on. Natasha Scruggs, thank you so much for all your great expertise in joining us.
No problem. Thank you for having me.